Hello, my turn. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Good morning, everyone. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Welcome to the Southeast Asian Regional Center for Graduate Study and Research in Agriculture, or SEARCA. Welcome to the SEARCA Agriculture and Development Seminar Series, or ADSS. My name is Joe Florendo, and I will be your host for today's event. The SEARCA ADSS is one of our platforms to encourage the presentation and discussion of development and research issues, as well as their implications for agricultural and rural development. Through these seminars, SEARCA proactively contributes to having a vibrant scientific exchange within the Los Baños science community and beyond. Speakers at SEARCA's ADSS have included scholars, researchers, thought leaders occupying influential positions in the Philippines, executive and legislative branches, and other government agencies, UN agencies, and other international development organizations, NGOs, and the academe. In the first ADSS of 2023, we are honored to host the World Bank Philippines to present the Philippines Country Climate and Development Report. Likewise, we are very glad to have distinguished guests, researchers, faculty, staff, and students around the Los Baños science community to witness this collaboration between World Bank and SEARCA to drive an insightful dialogue on climate change, particularly its impact on agriculture and ways of moving forward. To formally welcome us all in this event, I will now call on SEARCA Director, Dr. Glenn B. Gregorio.
Good morning to everyone. I always say if you're a politician, you don't have to have a written speech, but you are a scientist or anywhere, you have to have a written speech. Anyway, it's just very short. Again, good morning to everyone. It's nice to see everyone full pack after almost 3 years of pandemic. We are slowly going out of the pandemic, I hope. I think it will be reported now if we are really going out of pandemic. Now I want to greet Dr. Tian Medio, World Bank Country Director for the Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, Brunei, and the rest of the world. You have Asia Pacific there and East Asia. We have here the Director General of the International Rice Research Institute, John Bali. We have our esteemed speakers and finalists, Dr. Stefano, Pagiola, World Bank Senior Environmental Economist. You have Dr. Souleymane Coulibaly of the World Bank, Lead Economist and Program Leader for Equitable Growth, Finance and Institutions Practice Group for Brunei, Malaysia, Thailand, and of course, the Philippines. Dr. Clarissa David, the World Bank Senior Communication Officer. We have here Ms. Paula Macando, the World Bank Agricultural Economist. All economists are here. Mr. David Diodorito, the World Bank External and Corporate Relations Communication Officer. I could see here a lot of people from our friends from UPLB. I could see Dr. Rico Angcog here, the Dean of the School of Environmental Science and Management, who will be moderating later, and the panelist, Dr. Patricia Sanchez, a professor of UPLB CESAM and a climate change advocate or climate change steering committee somewhere in the Philippines. Of course, our friend Dr. Rodel Lasco is here, the executive director of the Oscar M. Lopez Center for Climate Change Adaptation and Disaster Risk Management Foundation, Incorporated. Dr. Rex Cruz, a friend, former UPLB Chancellor and SEARCA Senior Fellow and Professor Emeritus of the UPLB College of Forestry and Natural Resources. I could see here Dr. Rainier Wasman, our Senior Fellow, former climate change man, really, which would help us in the discussion also. Professors and students from UPLB, members of the Los Baños Science Community, SEARCA staff and scholars, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, a pleasant good morning to everyone. We are pleased to open the doors to SEARCA here at the Spatial Science and Nature City of Los Baños, one of the cradle of the Green Revolution, especially here in Asia. I will not do a speech about global warming, forestry, degradation, extreme drought, flooding. This high level rise is very prominent, and we have seen them, we have felt them. But what is this global phenomenon that is taking over the region, and how we could adapt to, if not mitigate it? So the climate action SD 13, which is climate action, is very near to my heart. As I mentioned, that I have been a plant breeder for rice, for abiotic stresses from salt tolerance, drought tolerance, submergence tolerance, all abiotic stresses for 29 years. So I mentioned in the team a while ago that I have been working on this before the climate change has started. 1986, I worked lonely working on salt tolerance, but now I become a little bit popular because of the climate change has come. So that's 29 years. So SEARCA has been committed to be the enabler and champion in alleviating the effect of climate change and provide venue where best practices can be shared and upscaled. We recognize that this is crucial in addressing food security, or they call now food resilience. This is the reason why it is important to have the buy-in from the academe, from the government, from the industries alike in promoting environmentally friendly practices. Actually, the narrative of climate change evolved with the emergence of eco-health or One Health concerns. Now this brings the whole value chain, not just limited to production. In the end, we have to realize that it is not just the climate change cliche. Regional security also means food resilience, and food resilience can only be attained with environmental sustainability. So today, SEARCA brings you a presentation of the Philippine Country Climate and Development Report of the World Bank. So I like the title because it's not only about climate, but they say about development. So it means there's a solution. So I just have a story before when I attended a seminar and an economist presented the condition of one country. I will hide the country's name in the name of Bangladesh. Story of Bangladesh. I think that was in 2005 when I was at Erie, and an economist presented the climate report of Bangladesh. All the gory pictures of the disaster, so gloomy as if there's no hope. Then that's how economists present. After the seminar, a renowned social scientist stood up. A lady, social scientist, stood up and asked the first question, and her comment was, talking to the economist presenting about the condition of Bangladesh. She says, "I think you should change the location of your country." So that's the solution. So I hope the report that we're having now Our speakers are all economists, environmental economists, or whatever other economists. But I'm assured that they will not only show the problems, but present solutions as they are from the banks, because bank people provide solutions. Again, welcome to SEARCA, and welcome. Maybe after that, you could see also our museum on sharing. We call it SEARCA Hub for Agriculture and Rural Innovation for the next generation. It's a digital museum. And again, thank you and welcome. God bless us all. God bless us all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gregorio. Now we would like to invite Dr. Ndiame Diop, World Bank Country Director for the Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, and Brunei, to give us his message.
Thank you very much, Dr. Glenn Gregorio, Dr. Rex Victor, Jean Ballier, the Director General of IRI, the leadership team of both SEARCA and UPLB, panelists of this seminar, faculty and students, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's really a pleasure for us, me and my team here, to be part of this SEARCA Agriculture and Development Series, seminar series. We really thank SEARCA and UPLB for this opportunity to share and to discuss the key finding of the CCDR that the bank launched back in November 2022. UPLB is one of the leading centers of excellence in science, research, and higher learning in this country. It is known as the breeding ground to the country's finest minds in many disciplines, including agriculture, economics, plant science, social science, biology, genetics, forestry, and engineering. So we are very, very honored to be here in this illustrious institution. I learned that long before climate change became a sort of a commodity and the talk of every day, researchers in these institutions right here have been, talking about it and have been doing work and research in this area. And for the Philippines, there is perhaps no subject that is more important for the development and the future of this country. So we are very pleased to share with you some of the key findings of this report, which we call CCDR. It's a new breed of report that we write, and it's a core diagnostic that we do. We are starting to do in many countries, and Philippines was one of the first countries in which we have done it. In the rest of East Asia, we have done one CCDR in China, one in Indonesia, and one in Vietnam. So we started with 4 countries, but we are rolling out globally this type of report to help really inform the policy dialogue and the public on climate change issues. What the CCDR basically does is to look at how climate change will affect the ability of countries to achieve their development goals, and to also try to identify opportunities for climate actions in particular countries for the public and the private sector to address. And in doing so, as was mentioned earlier by Dr. Glenn, we see climate and development as fully integrated. It's not either or sequential. It's not a zero-sum game. It's totally intertwined and should be seen as integrated. On the adaptation side, we can say for a country like the Philippines, climate adaptation is a necessary condition for eradicating poverty. At the same time, reducing poverty will help people and communities be more resilient to climate change. So it's really a two-way traffic and an integrated set of issues. And in the on the mitigation side as well, so the relationship between development and climate on the mitigation side can really lead to some trade-offs in the short term, right? But if you look at it from a longer term perspective, you see a lot of opportunity for win-win solutions. For example, in the case of the Philippines, scaling up renewable energy is consistent with the country's goal to really reinforce energy security and to reduce the price of electricity. In fact, one of the key findings of this report is that as you scale up renewable energy in the Philippines, you are able to really gradually reduce the price of electricity, which is critical for the country's competitiveness and for also household welfare. In the transport sector, if you decarbonize the transport sector, the gain in terms of reduction in pollution and the gain in terms of savings of health costs is enormous. So it's a win-win for the Philippines. And even in agriculture, climate smart technology can help not only increase productivity, but also reduce emission. So there are many, many opportunities to really strike, how do we say it again? To strike two bullets, two targets in one bullet, sorry. So now, what also is very evident is that the cost of inaction is extremely high. So one of the key findings of the report is that in a do-nothing scenario, in a country like the Philippines, by 2030, the total GDP may be smaller than in a in a scenario of climate action. And in fact, the GDP may be up to 7%, 7.6% smaller than what it should have been in the absence of climate shocks. Climate shock itself is really, really, really deterrent to development for the Philippines. And the good news, though, is that we know the solutions. And if you apply those solutions, and the solutions are very well known in the context of the Philippines, they include, for example, not constructing in flood-prone areas, not pumping water in areas where groundwater is shallow and subsidence risk is high, especially in the coastal areas. It's about investing in irrigation and bringing irrigation to the rain-fed areas. It's about investing in water storage to not only feed irrigation, but also to move the water across different areas, from the wet areas to the dry areas. And it's about investing in climate smart agriculture and nature-based solutions that would really help agriculture be more resilient while emitting less. So the solutions are known. And what the report finds is that when you apply those solutions, you're able to reduce the cost of climate change by 2/3, which is very significant. However, there's 1/3 that is out there that is inevitable. And that speaks to the importance of social protection to really help the vulnerable household that cannot be protected 100% because of the magnitude and the frequency of climate shocks. So the set of policy solutions are there, but they require financing. And this brings me to that part, which is really important, right? Financing is critical for adaptation, but also for mitigation. On the adaptation side, much of the financing, because of the public good nature of adaptation intervention in general, much of it should come from the public sector, from the central government, but also the subnational government. And there, the challenge is just to make sure that climate action for adaptation is prioritized in national budget. For mitigation, much of the investment should come from the private sector. This is really about investing in transport and investing in energy to decarbonize and to move to greener energy production and to greener transport. And there, what is important is for the government to have very clear target and to incentivize private action. But let me say that while much of the solutions are discussed at a very high level, one size doesn't fit all. It's really important to get down to the local level and to identify the local interventions that are important to address climate change at the local level. So basically what you need is a large number of localized interventions to address local climate change reality. And in the Philippines, there's a very high degree of heterogeneity of what is relevant in terms of climate action across the archipelago. So we believe that financing is really way below where it should be, including financing coming from the international organizations. The World Bank is currently discussing ways in which we can scale up the bank engagement on climate change, but also global public goods in general, and finding also ways in which that financing can be concessional to really sweeten the investment that government have to do. Because one of the big challenges of government is that they can identify green projects, but for those green projects to be financed, they have to be either financed by public budget or by the private sector. And the private sector has to see those projects as bankable. They have to be green, but also bankable. And finding ways to make those projects attractive to the private sector is a role that institutions like World Bank, ADB can perhaps play in terms of bringing soft and concessional and grant financing for this agenda. So let me stop here and wish ourselves a very productive discussion. We hope that these discussions and the sort of collective effort of academia, government, multinational institutions, etc., will raise the profile of climate change in public policy for us. And I look forward to hearing from all of you. And thank you very much for your kind attention.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Dio. The SEARCA World Bank collaboration on the presentation of the CCDR report has actually started last week, wherein the agriculture chapter of the report was presented at the 45th session of SOLVE, or SEARCA Online Learning for Virtual Engagements. We featured Ms. Anuja Kar, Senior Agricultural Economist of the Agriculture and Food Global Practice of the World Bank, who discussed issues and recommendations on increasing climate resilience in agriculture. This morning, we are honored to have a face-to-face event with the authors to give us an overview of the whole report. We have the lead authors, Dr. Stefano Pagiola and Dr. Souleymane Coulibaly. We also have with us today the contributing author to the agriculture chapter, Ms. Paula Beatriz Macandog, Agriculture Economist, Sustainable Development Practice Group of the World Bank. Now, allow me to briefly introduce to you the lead authors who are presenting today. Dr. Stefano Pagiola is a senior environmental economist in the World Bank's East Asia and Pacific Environment, Natural Resources, and Blue Economy Global Practice. He led the team who prepared the Philippines Country Climate and Development Report. He also leads the World Bank's innovative work on payments for environmental services and has helped design, implement, improve, and evaluate the PES programs in over a dozen countries. He also conducted analytical work to improve understanding of how PES programs work, the conditions under which they can be applied, how to adapt them to local conditions and needs, and their effect on poverty and many other aspects. He has also worked extensively on the valuation of natural resources and on the design on incentive mechanisms to conserve them. His work has been published in a variety of peer-reviewed journals. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Dr. Stefano Pagiola. Dr. Souleymane Coulibaly is the lead economist and program leader for Equitable Growth, Finance, and Institutions Practice Group for Brunei, Malaysia, Philippines, and Thailand. Before moving to Manila, he was the program leader and lead economist for Central Africa, covering a diverse set of countries. He joined the World Bank Africa region in January 2014 from the Operation and Policy and Quality Unit, where he was covering development policy lending and guarantee policies and operations, and represented the unit in the Non-Concessional Borrowing Policy Committee. Before OPCS, he was in the Eastern and Central Asia region, working simultaneously as trade economist and country economist of some former Soviet countries, as well as ECA regional trade coordinator. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Dr. Souleymane Coulibaly. Let me now call on Dr. Stefano Pagiola and Dr. Souleymane Coulibaly on stage to present their reports.
The Philippines is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. Climate shocks hamper economic activities, damage infrastructure, and impact the livelihoods of Filipinos, hurting the poor and vulnerable most. Adaptation to climate change, therefore, is critical to sustain recovery and reduce poverty. The World Bank's Country Climate and Development Report for the Philippines finds that the country has many options to address the climate crisis, including fully implementing and scaling up existing climate actions. The Philippines can reduce its vulnerability and future losses to climate change by implementing better flood management, avoiding new construction in floodplains and coastal areas already known to be at risk of flooding and storm surges, ensuring that new buildings are energy efficient, encouraging efficient use of water in farming, promoting mass transit and non-motorized transport, including bicycles in cities, improving water storage, and climate-proofing critical infrastructure, assets, and services. The report also calls for more investments in renewable energy to lessen air pollution and enhance energy security, and recommends that the existing social protection system be strengthened and scaled up to provide support to affected people. This is not a path without challenge. The investments needed for climate action are substantial, but not out of reach. Many climate actions are win-win solutions, contributing to mitigating climate change while making the Philippines more resilient.
So, Dr. Glenn Gregorio, Director of SEARCA, Dr. Jose Camacho, Chancellor of UP Los Baños, Dr. Jean Ballier, Director of ERI, members of the faculty, students, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to be here to present this important new report that the bank has prepared, the Country Climate and Development Report for the Philippines. As Director Diop just explained, the CCDR comprehensively analyzes, comprehensively analyzes how climate change will affect the country's ability to meet its development goals. But as Dr. Gregorio just pointed out, it's not enough to just point out the problems. Accordingly, the CCDR also helps identify opportunities for climate action by both the public and private sectors. It does this by first undertaking a number of deep dives into key sectors, selected based on where the impacts of climate change will be most significant and where people will be hardest hit. These sectors are water, agriculture, energy, transport, and urban areas. We are fully aware that this means we are not covering some important sectors. Indeed, even within the sectors that we do cover, we are unable to cover all issues. Second, we then bring these analyses together in a macroeconomic analysis that takes into account not just sector-specific impacts, but also how these impacts will in turn affect other sectors. This work draws on inputs from teams throughout the World Bank, and in turn, they depend on inputs from a large number of people and researchers, including many who are currently or have previously been affiliated with UP Los Baños. Today, I will summarize the main messages of the CCDR, but I'll only be able to scratch the surface. I urge you to read the report itself, as it provides much more detailed analysis than I'll be able to cover here today. We also have several background papers that go in even more depth, which should be available shortly. So let me start with a spoiler, although Ndiame has already given out the ending. The two main messages of this report is, first of all, that as we all know, climate change poses major risks for development in the Philippines. And we now have numerical estimates of just how grave that risks are. Policy and action would impose substantial economic and human costs, especially for the poor. Second, though, is that the Philippines has many options to address climate change, which could significantly reduce its impact. These options are feasible and their cost is modest. The private sector must play a large role in climate action, and so it's important that the right incentives be in place. Now, let me start by quickly reviewing the magnitude of the threat posed by climate change. This threat is not theoretical, and nor is it in the future. Temperatures in the Philippines have already risen by 2/3 of a degree Celsius, and typhoons have become more severe. As you can see in this chart, climate change in the Philippines will continue to accelerate, with temperatures rising by as much as 3 degrees under some scenarios. Average rainfall will probably not change much, but rainfall will become more intense and more erratic. Extreme weather events will become more severe. These changes will hit the Philippines particularly hard. The country is highly vulnerable to multiple hazards due to its unique geography. It is one of the most affected globally from extreme weather events. These trends will hamper economic activities, damage infrastructure, and induce deep social disruptions. Climate change will affect everybody, but will affect the poor and women disproportionately. Many of the poor live in areas that are particularly threatened to climate change. As you can see in these maps, areas of high poverty tend to overlap with areas at high risk of flood or drought. The poor also work in sectors that are more likely to be affected, such as agriculture, or do physical outside labor where rising temperature will cause particular problems. They also have many fewer means to cope with these issues. This means that adaptation is a priority for the Philippines. Adaptation means reducing the risk and damage from extreme events, but it also means addressing slow onset events like higher temperatures and sea level rise. The Philippines has already developed a comprehensive set of policies and institutions to address this challenge with a whole of government approach. It was, in fact, one of the first countries to do so, with important laws such as the Climate Change Act being passed over 15 years ago. The Philippines is also committed to an aggressive nationally determined contribution, calling for a 75% reduction in cumulative emissions of greenhouse gases by 2030. But, and there is a but, for all its achievements, the response to date has been uneven. Responsibilities and authority for climate change, for climate action is often dispersed and duplicative. Many policies have been only partially implemented. Local government units are increasingly responsible for climate action, but they often lack the capacity and resources to do so effectively. So there is more to be done, and an important part of the objective for the CCDR is to identify what that is. Let's now look at what climate change will look for some critical sectors and what can be done about it. Let's begin with water. Water is critical for economic activity and human well-being, and many of the impacts of climate change are likely to be felt through changes in the availability of water. What we find is that the impact of climate change on water users will vary significantly across the country. Areas that already face constraints on water use, such as most of Luzon, are likely to be particularly affected. But here we have a solution. Improving water storage could substantially mitigate the impacts of climate change on water users. Storage helps smooth out more erratic and more intensive rainfall, which would improve availability at times when water is needed and reduce the risk of flooding. It's important to note here that improving water storage includes not just building physical infrastructure, but also improving watershed management and measures such as improving forest cover. These kinds of nature-based solutions can make an important contribution to resilience while also bringing other benefits such as conserving biodiversity and sequestering carbon. Let's look at agriculture next, a topic that is probably of particular interest here. Agriculture is the sector that is most vulnerable to climate change, as it is affected directly by changes in temperature and rainfall, as well as being vulnerable to direct damage from typhoons and floods. Although agriculture is not as central to the economy as it once was, it still accounts for a quarter of employment. Agriculture is also an important source of emissions, as you see here. It accounts for about 25% of national GHG emissions, although unlike the emissions in other sectors, the emissions from agriculture are not growing rapidly. Most of these emissions are from methane emissions from irrigated rice on livestock production. As a result of climate change, the productivity of many crops is likely to decline. Rain-fed areas will be especially affected, as you can see here, but irrigated crops will also be affected in areas where water supplies are limited. Dr. Gregorio was mentioning to us earlier that he spent a lot of his professional life working on drought tolerance. I think that work is going to be particularly significant. You should make sure you pull it out of all your drawers and make it available. Lower agricultural production will then affect the well-being of farmers, many of whom are poor. And because it will lead to higher food prices, it will affect the well-being of all Filipinos, and again, especially of the poor who spend the greater part of their income on food. The number of people at risk of hunger will increase by 8% by 2030 and 12.8% by 2050. The good news here is that there are many climate-smart agricultural practices that could generate triple wins. They could increase productivity and increase resilience while also lowering emissions. Bringing irrigation to rain-fed areas could also bring major improvements in productivity and resilience. But whether these practices are adopted depends critically on whether they are financially attractive to farmers. This chart here shows the financial returns to farmers from several climate-smart agricultural options in green and the emissions reductions that they would generate in brown. And here you can see an important problem. Although techniques such as alternate wetting and drying could increase productivity and reduce emissions in irrigated agriculture, they are not financially attractive to farmers because most of their productivity improvements take the form of greater water efficiency, and farmers do not pay for water. As a result, adoption of these practices to date has been very limited. Here, as in many other aspects of climate action, making sure that actors face the right incentives is critical. Let's now turn to energy, which plays a critical role in all economic activity and is currently the largest source of emissions in the country. The CCDR examines several options for an energy transition: a business as usual scenario in which nothing is done, a scenario that reflects current policies as reflected in the Philippine Energy Plan 2020-2040, and an accelerated decarbonization scenario that aims at reducing annual emissions by 80% by 2040. The figure shows that accelerated decarbonization would reduce emissions much faster than current policies by accelerating the adoption of renewable energy sources such as solar and wind power and retiring coal-fired plants more aggressively. A very important part of this transition is that all the options would reduce electricity generation costs compared to current levels, as you can see in the figure on the left. Another very important result is that accelerated decarbonization will also bring substantial national benefits by reducing air pollution, as you can see in the figure on the right. In contrast, under current policies, pollution and the damage and the harm it causes would continue to worsen. This means that accelerated decarbonization is in the Philippines' own interest, quite aside of how it might help contribute to mitigating global climate change. Transport is another sector in which win-wins are possible. Emissions of greenhouse gases and local air pollutants from transport are soaring. If nothing is done, they will increase fourfold by 2040 and soon exceed current national emissions from all sources. Here, too many options are available that would substantially reduce emissions. Some of them are shown in this chart. Some, such as supporting non-motorized transport, such as bicycling, would only reduce emissions a little, but are well worth pursuing because their cost is very low. Electrifying transport, although it would be costly, would bring the greatest benefit. Here too, reduced air pollution would be an important benefit for the country itself. The extent of this benefit would increase as electricity production increasingly relies on renewables and the grid becomes greener. Let's now look at urban areas. Almost half of Filipinos live in urban areas, and cities account for around 80% of the country's GDP. But cities are increasingly vulnerable to threats such as flooding, and because most cities are in coastal areas, also from storm surges. As you can see in this map, what this means for Metro Manila and how much of its infrastructure is at risk. A key recommendation here is to redirect urban growth away from areas known to be at risk. Let's not make the problem worse. Redirecting growth would also allow more compact urban design, which would facilitate the development of mass transit, helping reduce air pollution as well as time lost in traffic. Let me now pass the microphone to my colleague Souleymane to explain the macroeconomic results.
Thanks. Let's be a bit geeky for economics now to see what is behind some of the modeling part, because sector-specific issues are very relevant, very important, but when they come together, they can have also broader implications. So in the CCDR, we try to look at this sectoral cross-intervention, because, for instance, climate shocks negatively affect growth through many ways. For instance, eroding natural capital, physical capital, reducing labor productivity, weakening financial stability, altering domestic as well as external competitiveness, and straining public finances. And also the policies to address these climate shocks also have some spillover effect also on aggregate productivity, on physical and human capital. So we have this interrelated aspect dimension, and we need a model that will try to see what is the impact on the economy at large. So this is what we try to do in the CCDR. We relied on macroeconomic models. Some, I hope, here are familiar with it, and those who want to see all the adjustment and the hypotheses that went through, the numbers you will see, I'm happy to put you in touch with the broader team or myself if you want to have a discussion. But these large numerical tools capture the economic structure and the behavioral of key players like firm, like household and government. And we use them also to see the impact on the population at large, household and distributional aspects. So because different models have different strengths and weaknesses, we use a suite of models. So not only single one model, but a couple of them, and you will see in the annexes, for instance, of the report, what different model we have been using. Because we are here on the Las Bañas campus that is specialized in agriculture, I wanted to illustrate here also what it means for the specific things happening at the sectoral level in agriculture means for the economy wide here. So this slide shows an example of intersectoral effect that our model takes into account. As climate change reduces agricultural production, these prices also will be impacted, will rise, and this will have an impact on consumers. And particularly the poor have a larger share of their consumption in food. This will have also an impact on the consumers' income over the period we are looking at our estimations. Now let's look at specific estimation from our model, and I will summarize some of the key findings. We know that damage from disaster risk are having an impact on the Philippine economy. We try to put some concrete numbers based on a couple of modeling and estimations I mentioned. For instance, So as you can see on the graph here, the impact of damages coming from natural disaster can have a wide range impact on the economy. The lower band is what you will see on the top, and the higher, as we model different typhoon intensity, can be on the, I would say, the lower side of the estimation. And by 2040, Njame mentioned the 2030, which is 7.6% of GDP less. But by 2040, it can be almost nearly 14%. So we see that a natural disaster can have a major impact on the economy if they are not properly addressed through adaptation measures. So damages can also have an impact on the poor. As illustrated on the figure here, everybody will be affected definitely by climate change, but the poor will suffer the most. The poorest household will see their consumption fall by about 9%. If no measures are taken to address climate changes by 2040, poverty rate will also increase by nearly 1 percentage point. The financial sector also will be impacted. The greater typhoon damage, the greater the share of non-performing loans that will be putting the financial sector at risk. So as I said, with adaptation measures, we can reduce some of the impact. So the good news is that adaptation action can substantially reduce the impact of climate change. As you can see on the graph here, measures to adapt to climate change would reduce economic losses by about 2/3. We estimate that adaptation measures could cost about 0.7% of GDP, mostly for agriculture, but also for measures that will be boosting climate resilience in agriculture. This cost is easily outweighed by the benefit it will be generating in terms of reduced damage. Adaptation measures also can have an impact on the poor, a positive impact, because everybody will be impacted by climate change. Everybody will also benefit from adaptation measures, but here too, the poor will benefit the most, with poverty and economic insecurity falling faster with adaptation, as illustrated on the graph here. Turning to mitigation, actions such as energy transition, our simulation also showed that this action can have a positive economic impact. We mentioned earlier the reducing of emission that will bring important national benefits to reducing electricity price, air pollution. In our simulation, we also show that the investment required to have the energy sector transform will also have a spillover effect on economic growth, as investment in the energy sector will also increase the size of the capital that is going into the sector, and also allow opportunity to increase production. The magnitude of this effect depends on the specific assumption we have been testing out in the exercise of the CCDR, but we estimated at about 0.5% of increase of GDP that will be coming from this additional energy investment. Mitigation action will also help to reduce poverty and economic insecurity, as you can see in the graph here. Now, how do we finance all of this? This is where we look at different entry points, but implementing adaptation measures require that appropriate financing is available and that incentives are well aligned. Some adaptation measures will provide a direct benefit to individuals and firms that will require public support for this to happen. However, many measures would also require the financing of the private, because there will be an interest from the private sector to get into it. On the public side, here for the adaptation measures, strengthen budgets, tagging is one way. Procurement policies such as green procurement are also important. Layered disaster risk financing strategy are being pursued by the government right now, and that can help. We also know on the private sector that with the sustainable finance framework that has been put forward now, some private sector fund can be mobilized through ESG bonds, and this can help also to finance the adaptation measures that are needed. On the mitigation side, financing mitigation measures required to ensure incentive, and Jamie mentioned it, I think Stefano also. This can also mean more concessional financing so that that encourage the government and the private sector to take some mitigation measures. Mitigation investment will need to be sourced mainly from the private sector, but incentivized by government and existing regulatory measures, for instance, to adopt new technology, green technologies. We also, in our estimation, find that setting a moderate price for carbon can be very important, even as low as $5 per ton of CO2 equivalent, with the possibility of raising it in the future could help to signal firms and individuals to adopt low carbon technologies, while also raising revenue of about 0.4% of GDP per year. Adding another measure, for instance, on trading schemes, in addition to the carbon tax, can also be important. Some voluntary also carbon measure that can get credit to firms can also be important for the technology push policies the government is putting forward. Also, significant investment in solar, in battery storage technology without imposing significant burden to the energy sector or industrial competitiveness. So these are some of the aspects we have been looking at how to finance. And let me turn to Stefano, who will be highlighting the final conclusion from our report.
Thank you, Sue. Based on its analysis, the report provides detailed recommendations for each sector and for many cost-cutting issues. We do not have the time to cover them here. I encourage you to read the report for both the recommendations and the analysis on which they are based. The main message we want to convey, once again, is that climate change poses a significant threat to development in the Philippines, and that policy and action would impose substantial economic and human costs, particularly for the poor. But the good news is that the Philippines has many feasible options to respond to climate change. In fact, the Philippines is already taking action, and in many cases, what it needs to do is to improve implementation and scale up what it is already doing. Other actions involve not doing things, not continuing to grow in areas known to be at risk of flooding, storm surges, or sea level rise, for example. To be sure, investments will be required, but the cost of these investments is well within reach. As you can see in this figure, the investments needed to respond to climate change represent only a small increase over the investments that the Philippines would anyway undertake as a normal part of economic activity. And as Sue has just told us, the Philippines has many options to generate this financing. As we have emphasized throughout this presentation, making sure that the incentives are right is critical. This can be done in many ways, by using price signals to remove perverse incentives, by using environmental taxes to discourage harmful activities, by providing direct support to climate-smart actions, and by providing clear information on the cost of climate change and the benefits of climate action. It may also require removing obstacles to private sector climate action, such as ensuring that financing is available, removing regulatory obstacles, attracting climate action by foreign investors, ensuring that trained workers are available, and strengthening the financial sector's ability to contribute to climate action. It's also essential to improve the effectiveness of climate action by the government. Much is already being done, but there is room for improvement in how it is being done. This requires improving the coordination of climate action at all levels of government, enhancing the capabilities of local government units to design and implement climate actions, and focusing on effective implementation of existing plans and regulations. Effective climate adaptation action will substantially reduce the climate change on the people of the Philippines, but will not completely eliminate it. It's important, therefore, to help the poor and vulnerable to cope with the effects of climate change. The existing adaptive social protection programs provide a strong basis for targeted relief of those who are affected. Other measures that can be taken include provide training for green jobs, improving the resilience of the education system, and implemented climate-sensitive health policies. Let us conclude by reiterating some critical messages. First, let's avoid making the problem worse by continuing to build in areas known to be at risk. There's an old saying that when you're in a hole, you should stop digging. So let's make sure we stop digging. Second, as most investments will have to be undertaken by the private sector or by individual farm households, making sure that the incentives are right is critical. It's also important to make sure that there are no regulatory obstacles and that private sector actors have access to finance, technical assistance, and to a trained workforce. More broadly, it's important for climate actions to address both extreme and slow onset events. There has been a lot of attention, and rightly so, on the risks posed by more severe typhoons, but the threats posed by slowly rising temperatures and increasingly erratic rainfall must also be addressed. Because the threats posed by climate change vary across the country, the responses must also be tailored to local conditions. We need to avoid one-size-fits-all approaches. In particular, we also need to target climate action, taking poverty and vulnerability into consideration, and use tools such as adaptive social protection to help the poor and the vulnerable to manage the risks posed by climate change and the potential adverse effects of climate action. We do have a number of copies of the report to distribute here, but you can also download it by using this QR code or simply by Googling Philippines CCDR. It'll be one of the top hits as a result of that search. Thank you very much for your attention, and we welcome your questions and comments on this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pagiola and Dr. Coulibaly. May I invite Dr. Pagiola and Dr. Coulibaly on stage? Kindly seat yourself at the near me. Thank you. I know the audience have lingering thoughts and questions. We will be entertaining them later, but to give us more insights and reactions on the report, we have invited an expert panel to help us dive deeper into the topics and findings of the report. To help us moderate this panel discussion, we have Dr. Rico C. Angkog, Dean of the School of Environmental Science and Management, UPLB. I now turn over the floor to Dr. Angkog for the panel discussion, followed by an open forum with the audience. Thank you.
A very pleasant morning. Thank you very much, Sergio. Well, this is now our opportunity to really discuss with our invited distinguished panelists so that we can then dissect the highlights and then the key messages on the Philippine CCDR and other relevant issues around climate change. To start off, let me introduce our panelists one by one. First, we have with us Dr. Patricia Sanchez, who is an agricultural engineer with research interests in environmental hydrology, climate change impacts, adaptation, mitigation, disaster risk reduction and management, of course, water resources management, extreme events, hydrological modeling, and crop modeling. Dr. Sanchez coordinates and co-teaches ecosystem structure and dynamics, contemporary issues in environment and development, environmental hydrology and graduate seminar at CESAM. And she is the chair of the UPLB Interdisciplinary Study Center for Water and serves as the national panel of technical experts of the Climate Change Commission. Dr. Sanchez, please join. The next speaker actually needs no introduction, but let me still introduce Dr. Rodel Lasco. Dr. Lasco is the executive director of the Oscar M. Lopez Center for Climate Change Adaptation and Disaster Risk Management Foundation, Incorporated. Thank you. Oscar M. Lopez Foundation is a private foundation whose mission is to promote action research on climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction. Concurrently, he is also a senior scientist of the World Agroforestry Center, or ECRAF. We all know ECRAF is a center devoted to promoting trees on farms. And of course, Dr. Lasco's work is focused on issues related to natural resources conservation, climate change, and land degradation, among others. He's an author of several reports of the IPCC, the 2007 co-winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. Lasco. Sir. Thank you, sir. Also joining the panel is Dr. Rex Victor Cruz, former Chancellor of UPLB and a Professor Emeritus at the UPLB College of Forestry and Natural Resources and the SEARCA Senior Fellow and also in Disaster Risk Management Foundation Incorporated. Dr. Rex Cruz is a renowned expert in watershed management and climate change adaptation. He was a member of the IPCC of the UN that won the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize with former US Vice President Al Gore. Sir Rex, a very pleasant morning. Let's give him a round of applause. Okay. As we are all set, please. So far, we have received a very good presentation earlier. And it's good to then do a deep dive about, how this one would mean really in the Philippines. And now we will then further look into specific actions, support, and then the policy to really speed up implementation of climate actions in our country. Now, let me get started with the first question for our three panelists, and maybe later our presenters can then join. Okay. For first question, how can we then get our communities, the academia? This is not a quiz though, but very important to then ask, how can we then get our communities, the academia, the stakeholders in general, for them to be more engaged with climate policy action? So let's start with you, Dr. Sanchez, to be followed by Dr. Lasco, and then with Dr. Cruz, and then maybe request that each answer, maybe 3 minutes would be fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. I feel like I'm answering a quiz with my teachers here and my bosses. So to answer the question, I was contemplating while reading the report, and I noticed that there's a lot of very specific solutions that were written in the report. And in terms of engaging our communities and stakeholders, I was thinking about first for policy, so participatory governance would be needed because each and every locality, so the local government units actually have their own priorities, and they need to be involved. If they're going to be crafting the local ordinances that would implement these actions, they need to be able to participate not only in getting the final policy, but in crafting it one step at a time. The second one is so information dissemination. These need to be disseminated maybe at a more local level in the local dialect, and they need to sift through this because it's a lot of information, and sometimes they only need a few, maybe like maximum of 3, not the whole thing, because it will overwhelm them. So it has to be directed like, look, this is what's going to happen to your area. This is what you need to do. A, B, and C. That's it. And then third is there is what we call the Mandanas ruling, which allows more action independence by our local government units. And that means that our LGUs will have more power, more funding, sir, no? More funds downloaded to them to do these actions. But they need to be directed. It's not like the government is not supporting them. It's more of they are not yet capacitated fully to implement this independently. So we need multiple stakeholders that would help. And I think this is where all of us can come in. That's my take on this.
3 points. Let's go to that. Mike.
This is very, okay, thank you so much again, Dean Rico, and good morning to all of you. I just wanted, first of all, to say yes to a lot of the things that we heard. These are the things that we've been advocating for perhaps more than 20 years in some cases. And so we're glad to see that this is already seeing the light of day. So just want to add a few things here. One is we still need, I think, to download a lot of the information in academia and research centers like UPLB and of course the bank, and download it to the more grassroots level. Reaching the LGUs, as you mentioned, is very important. our center commissioned the study twice of all the interaction on climate change that's happening on the web and emanating in the Philippines, just sort of to track what's the content of that discourse. Because as you know, the Filipinos are very savvy in terms of social media. And quite perhaps disappointingly, a lot of the chatter and a lot of the social media is coming from, say, politicians during elections, which you probably wouldn't think are the, paragons or models of climate change adaptation and mitigation. That's very surprising. And especially here in UPLB, you'll probably be disappointed if I name the name of that presidential candidate who was contributing to all of this chatter. But so the point is, we need to do more. We need to do more because we're essentially preaching to the choir here. I think a lot of us here are aware and are supportive of what we heard. So that's my main, perhaps, and major point. Private sector, there's a lot of things going on. There's now a net zero carbon alliance. Maybe you've heard about this. And this is led by the private sector. And so this is something that we need to support, as we heard, in terms of mitigation. So mainstreaming, that's very important as well. We have to integrate a lot of these things in current activities. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I guess that's all for me for now. Dean Rico, passing this on to Chancellor Rec.
Yeah, thank you very much. Congratulations to Dr. Pagiola and Dr. Coulibaly for the report, actually. And in relation to your question on what can be done to upscale or increase the level of participation of local communities, I agree with what Dr. Pat mentioned and what Dr. Lasco mentioned. But let me also emphasize I think two important points that I heard from Dr. Pagiola's report, and this is, and even I think from Dr. Job's brief opening remarks, and that is, to make sure that we don't fall into the one size fits all paradigm of enhancing the adaptive capacity of the local communities, because we know how distinct these communities are, from one another. In the Philippines, we have vast, geographic diversity, and that translates into vast diversity in terms of culture, in terms of practices and knowledge. And so I think that is very important. If we want to capture and encourage local communities to engage, in climate change adaptation and even in climate change mitigation, this has to be taken into focus, and not again fall into, for instance, the national lens, that we're trying to impose on the local communities. So that is going to be very important. And of course, just to emphasize the importance of capacity building, local communities, are probably not necessarily, I'm not saying that they don't have any knowledge or any system of practice, when it comes to climate change adaptation. But I think, they need some assistance in developing new skills, new competencies, new way of doing things, in relation to climate change. And that can easily merge and enrich what they already have, by way of their indigenous practices, indigenous knowledge, and so on. So I think those are the 2 points that I'd like to emphasize.
Really important is the message, and then grassroots, and then the process more about participatory, and then really sending the message across down to the very community level. The report was very substantive. We must really emphasize that. Lots of policy prescriptions, but for the we need to prioritize our resources. But among that long list, let me address this question to Dr. Lasco. Sir, if we're going to then identify the topmost policies that you think will be required, to really jumpstart innovation and technologies, particularly on climate change adaptation and disaster risk management in the country, what do you think would those be?
Okay, well, there's a lot of policies out there, of course, that we need to support right now. For example, we have the People's Survival Fund. I was waiting for that, by the way. I'm sure you came across it. And I heard it's already opening again this March, so, and we are up to now assisting one LGU. And so this is something to build upon. We have the law already, we have people survival, we have the Climate Change Act, and we can build on this in terms of encouraging more local action. So I would go for that, policies supporting local action, Dean Rico.
Yeah, much of that was really macro level, and also there were interventions at the ground level. But institutionally, it can then be contextualized with the PSF fund where financing is already there. Very good point. How about for Dr. Cruz, sir? This is not an exam, but this is a friendly conversation.
Yeah. Are you asking me the top most?
No, but I have another question.
Oh,
for you,
yeah.
sir.
Oh,
Yeah.
wanted to answer.
If you have, sir.
I prepared
Yes,
for
sir,
that
go ahead.
question.
Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
And I don't know how much time you're giving me here, but let me just mention a few. I have 9 items here. Let me be very quick, because a lot of this I do believe, is important, and I've been working on this for a long, long time. I agree with providing more incentives for renewables. I like that. I support that. I agree with that. But I think, we also have to invest in making sure that these renewables are affordable to the households and to the farmers, if you want to do that. And I don't know how to do it if there is, an economy, an economic scale when it comes to small scale renewables. But I think that's going to be very important, especially to households that are located in areas that are off, the main grid, and it's going to be a challenge. And second, we have to include climate resilient and responsiveness parameters for budget allocation and support, to projects of NGAs and local government units. I think it was mentioned, in the report. And then third, aside from implementation of existing plans, which I consider very important, I'd like to highlight also the importance of facilitating the robust implementation of integrated approach to land use and development planning, particularly of the local government units and the national government agencies. This will require a substantive integration of LGU land use and development plans across LGUs. And we're talking about here now local government units working with each other, especially those that share common landscape units. And then also improving the interconnections and the coordination of the plans of the national government agencies and the local government units. If we can do this, this can promote greater efficiency in the use of budget that are large in the national government agencies and the budget that are now going to be large in the local government units, which was mentioned by Dr. Pat. It's going to increase by about 30% because of the Mandanas ruling. And how can we make sure that these two sources of funding, can be used more efficiently and synergistically? And then that can also reduce overlaps, competition, antagonism, and efficiencies, in plans of the local government units and the programs of the national government. And then recognizing the vital roles of the private sector in achieving resilient development and secure population, there's a need to provide stable and reassuring policy environment for private sector investments. And I'm saying this in particular to forest-based solutions. Forest-based solutions will really entail a lot of private sector engagements, but there has to be some revisiting of the process, that they have to go through. How can we reduce the transaction cost, of the private sector engaging in forest-based projects, forest-based solutions? This is going to be very, very critical. I'd like to mention also the increase in agriculture production through intensification over agricultural expansion. I think what we're seeing is that expansion are still ongoing, and what is happening is that it's eating up on the remaining natural lands that we have, and this is something that probably we have to highlight more in our discussions, in the discourse, because this is something that I have not heard very often, in these types of, how agriculture expansion that is driven by urbanization, is actually causing, damages to the natural ecosystems that we have, that then creates a greater problem, not only in terms of climate change, but also in terms of increasing other risks associated with human activities. No? And then I also support the recommendation of increasing the ability to capture excess rainfall and runoff. I think I'd like what Dr. Pagiola mentioned about improving watershed management to improve the capture of rain, in a natural way. But I do believe that it's high time for us to talk about some of the structural measures,
Okay.
which we need to invest on, and this is of course something that is not popular, but I'm raising it nonetheless, and I'm referring to big infrastructure to capture excess rainfall and runoff. And then I like the findings also on the need for relatively small additional investments needed for climate change adaptation and mitigation. I have long believed that if we just do things correctly, with what we're supposed to do, and and that means enforcing and implementing existing laws and plans and programs. I do believe that there is so much benefit in that already, without really investing on doing any other things. Just doing the programs and the plans that we already have. We have to, we do have some good programs and plans that we can work on. But I do also recognize that there are some bad plans and policies that we have to work on as well. I think we have to work on this both,
Yeah.
and
Correct. Those are good points that you raised. Like maybe a number of those are considered to be low hanging fruit, something that
that's
can
right,
be
exactly.
achieved very urgent and fits well with the recommendations mentioned in the CCDR. But I'd like to get your thoughts very, very quickly. Any idea how to then quickly achieve a number of those? Because, we're not lacking with what needs to be done. We just have to really implement it. But very quick thoughts about how to really get started implementing it on the ground, and then hopefully achieve it sooner than later. Oh, that's a difficult question, I understand, but
That's not an easy question,
that's not an easy question, but
That's not an easy question. One thing that comes into my mind here very quickly is that we want to implement something, especially existing programs and policies. We have to increase the sense of accountability of people who are responsible for enforcing and implementing. I think that is one thing that we have to say to people who are supposed to enforce. How do we increase their sense of accountability? Accountability to the be the local government units, national government agencies, or at any level of governance and decision makers. How do we make them accountable for it? I don't see enough accountability mechanisms, enough to incentivize our law enforcers, policymakers, to actually, that's one that comes
that's a
quickly into
very
mind.
good point about accountability mechanisms. You mentioned about the Mandanas ruling, and much of the actions really will be, done at the national level, but also should be implemented at the local level. In the report, there was really a strong emphasis about, financing mechanisms. Any thoughts about, related to the earlier question? What do you think really is the way to go with regards to the financing mechanism, so that the Philippines can leverage and attract funding, because this is a fuel to get things started and to be achieved? Dr. Pat, very quick, please.
Exam na to. So in terms of the financing mechanism, I was thinking about like what the disadvantages are to the private sector, because our current available financing mechanism in the country actually is gives more priority to our local government and to like government in general, but it does not really include incentives or even disincentives to the private sector. So in the end, it ends up like it's just a CSR, corporate social responsibility, and it's not really directed to anything. So sometimes it's in the form of basketball courts in the local area, and then they
Okay.
invest their money on it. But it's not directed towards our ultimate goal, which is reducing poverty and reducing the risks that is happening in the local area, like in our coastal region. So I would go for providing that clear-cut mechanism. So we have funding, and as in the report, it's a small amount that I think our government could allow,
Yeah.
but the direction of where that funding goes has to be somehow,
Yeah.
there needs to be somebody pushing for, okay, this is our priority. This is step number 2. This is step number 3. Otherwise, it's going to be a bunch of basketball courts everywhere in the country, and we don't want that.
But
Yeah.
good that you point about the CSR. Well, this is good, but this is not
Yeah,
really
it's not,
maybe
it's
enough.
optional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's really more about the enabling environment for the private sector to really invest on this. Any thoughts about this very quick sort of
Well, as I've said, I see the private sector moving very fast, both mitigation and adaptation. A lot of our conglomerates, for example, are very actively involved in climate change discussions, leading civil society as well as corporates and conglomerates. And this is very encouraging. And these are the top most biggest corporations in the country, and we have to take advantage. For financing, we have to look at the international, national, as well as local. All of these levels have financing, including the multilateral and bilateral banks, for example. So there's a plethora of funding out there. We just have to marshal these and be more intentional and more intelligent in the way we access this funding. That's probably all I want to say, Adin.
good that you emphasize that. Perhaps from the government side, Sir Rex, and what should the government do to then, provide the enabling environment so that the plethora of these private sector initiatives can then be wielded and then support really our climate change agenda?
I think, the government should make it really easy and simple, for the private sector, for instance, to really be engaged, in climate change investments. We are helping now to conglomerates that Dr. Lasco, was mentioning about. And really one of the challenges is, how do we simplify the process, and how do we make sure that the policy environment, are, as I said before, reassuring, that they provide stability to their investment, that policy, will not change, in a matter of one disaster, for instance, to occur, it has to be, there has to be that. There has to be a system that is facilitating in terms of, starting off the investment, and then second, there has to be that stability in the policy environment, to make sure that this investment do not hesitate and do not, and are not apprehensive, in putting in a lot of money, thinking, maybe next year, my investment will be stalled, just because some policies will have to change. Okay. So I think, that is going to be very, very important for private investment.
This has been a very good and productive discussion, but we want the audience to, of course, participate in our discussion. May we then invite the audience joining us here live or also via Facebook to please post any question. You are very much welcome. We have mics available. So any question from the audience, please? Okay, see Sir Ongi. Sir, we'll have one question. Sir, kindly introduce yourself and your affiliation. And we would like to request very quickly, we don't have much time, but we'll be happy to hear your thoughts.
Hello, good morning. I'm Ogie Arcenas from the College of Public Affairs and Development. And it's been pretty interesting listening to not just, but particularly I'd like to congratulate because I thought that it would provide, especially for those researchers, sort of initial guidance in terms of how to proceed with the work that we do. But also, perhaps taking off from the comments of panelists, one of the things that really caught me, I was just discussing this with Dr. Castillo about the investment in the country, the utilization of public resources in the country really needs to improve because there's a lot of. And I was thinking that, you know, if let's say for all the projects that we need in order to cope with climate change, we need let's say we need 100 million. We would have to borrow 150 in order to compensate for the leaks that occur. And unfortunately, I can't really see, or I can't really contribute any suggestion as to how to address the leaks when it comes to public resource utilization. And that, to me, that still remains a problem, which I think will continue. But unless it is addressed, we would always be wasting resources. And I see the amount of problem, the things that we need to do for the country, especially in these very crucial and urgent times. But if you have any suggestions how these, because the leaks isn't just at the national government, it's also in the local government level. So perhaps that could be the beginning of discussion, or perhaps you have suggestions, because right now, as I was talking to Dr. Castillo, how do we address the leaks when it comes to public resource utilization?
Dr. Arsenas, thank you for that question. Earlier, there was a emphasis on accountability, but maybe we can ask our speakers. Dr. Pagiola, any thoughts about improving how we spend public funds and make sure we reduce those leakages?
Yeah, that's a very important question. And maybe for context, I think it's important to realize that the use of public resources here, the question arises somewhat differently than it does in several other countries. In Vietnam, for example, where we also prepared a CCR this year, the government still plays a dominant role in the economy, directly and through state-owned enterprises. And so the use of public resources there is obviously a critical question. In the Philippines, a lot of sectors are very highly privatized. The government simply does not play the same role as it does in Vietnam and many other countries. And so a lot, as we emphasize, and as some of the panelists also pointed out, the private sector will have to play the dominant role here. So the incentives and the enabling environment, the stability of the policy regime are all critical factors here in ensuring that they play that role. So the question with respect to public resources is to make sure, first of all, that they are very properly targeted to things that only the government can do. There are certain kinds of actions which are dominated, for example, by public goods, where the incentive for the private sector to undertake them will always be very limited. So let's identify those which really need government's resources, because otherwise they will not have. In terms of energy, for example, at this point, solar and wind are already much cheaper than, let's say, a new coal-fired. So somebody adding capacity now will not be adding a new coal-fired plant. They'll be adding solar, they'll be adding wind. So again, a part of what we need to do here is regulatory reform to make sure that there's nothing stopping them from doing that. But also we'll need complementary incentives from the public sector, for example, in the grid. There are, again, aspects that will need public. I mean, it's very important, and we pointed out in the report, that we identify those aspects. Then, of course, to make sure that it's then spent well is a critical factor, and accountability, as was pointed out, the critical transparency in how resources are used, and accountability for critical things. But these are things that you know much better than I do. And there's no easy answer on how to make that happen, unfortunately.
Maybe we can hear also from Dr. Coulibaly. Thoughts, sir?
Maybe what I will add is the current environment, global environment, is also a good incentive for government to be more efficient in public finance management, because we have less revenue available, we have more needs, and we know that the population will be requesting. So I think that tough fiscal position of the government is already important. And I know that they want to maintain the 5% of GDP in public investment. So how do you make sure you get the most you can from this 5%? Will kind of impose itself to government at the national level and at the subnational level. Now, there are systems that can help do that. They can be improved. And the bank and other international organizations are working with them on public investment management, public procurement, for instance, the way of procuring goods so that we make sure they are done in an efficient way. That takes into account the climate reality. So these are system-wide approaches that we try to interact with counterpart to reflect that. So this is the external condition will also impose any way to reduce leaks.
So there are those external mechanisms that can be imposed, but maybe we can hear very quickly, Sir Rex, because for sure from the internal perspective.
Yeah, I have seen several places in the Philippines where one program, are being implemented on top of another, and one program being implemented several times, And I think this is a common source of leakage, and inefficiency in the use of funds. I think we tend to overlap, to repeat, to duplicate. I think the term used, is that many are duplicative, and that is one because of the lack of an integrated framework or an integrated way of designing programs and even doing planning. And then second is the absence of continuity. If you look at how fastly the turnover is in the projects of the local government units and even of the national government units, as the administration changes, the priority changes, and many times the investment of the previous ones, even if it's good, they're totally negated, and not continued because of a new priority of a new administration. So I think the discontinuity and the lack of long-term vision, is something that is really hurting us in terms of using efficiently our resources. Yeah.
But it is also important to emphasize that, at least for the Philippines, while we have 6-year development plan for every administration, at least we now have the long-term vision 2040. And that's sort of a good indication of, towards the direction, but perhaps there's really that there's more that needs to be done on the public spending aspect, as has been pointed out by Dr. Arsenas. I saw the hand also of Dr. Edna Aguilar at the back. Ma'am, please. And then.
Morning, everyone. I'm Edna Aguilar from the Institute of Crop Science, UPS. I would like to focus on an important resource of the country, occupying 3.5 million hectares, a permanent crop, and it is coconut. Coconut involves also like 2.5 to 3 million farmers directly working on the crop. So I would like to ask, given the environmental services that coconut provides, other than, of course, the economy being the #1 export of the country, and the many stakeholders involved. According to Dr. Lasco's study way back in 2000, a coconut area would sequester 4.7 tons of carbon. And with the thrust on the coconut is also very amenable to intercropping, And that is one of the focus, intensification, as Dr. Rex has said. Also based on the report of the World Bank, it is the only crop that has a positive, non-negative impact given the changes in the climate. So how can the farmers benefit from the environmental services it provides and the other People's Survival Fund and the other policies that would so that the LGUs, could be incentivized also to take better care of the coconut, given that, our plantations are very old and it needs replanting. And it is one of the trusts of the government, But while the Coconut Levy Fund provides, money to the coconut industry in the next 50 years, it is but a drop water to just, started, but we need long-term solutions. And I think if we look at coconut, our climate, climate mitigation and
Yeah.
adaptation could easily be achieved. Thank you.
Dr. Aguilar, thank you for pointing. That's a very important commodity actually in the Philippines. In the report, Dr. Pagiola, there was an analysis on the agri sector. I just don't know whether there's a specific analysis for each of the commodity. Any thoughts on the points raised by Dr. Aguilar?
Well, thank you for your very interesting question. We do look at a number of crops, not in any huge detail, clearly. Interestingly, coconut, as I think you mentioned, is one of the few crops that seems to benefit from climate change in terms of impact on productivity. So in that sense, it'll likely to become more attractive for farmers to produce coconut. Now, I know very little, I must admit, about coconuts. But I think in general, what we need to be looking at a wide range of options here. Different crops in different locations will have particular advantages, will be better suited to those conditions, and will be more or less vulnerable to the specific way that climate change will affect those areas. So we need to be alert and take into consideration a wide range of options of how we might, what kinds of crops we might be producing in different areas, what makes most sense in terms of resilience, in terms of productivity, in terms of impact on the livelihood of the farmers. We should also, I mentioned the importance of considering nature-based solutions to help us manage hydrological issues. Nature-based solutions doesn't mean just forest. I mean, clearly reforestation is an important option there. But we also need to be considering a wide range of other options such as agroforestry, silvopastoral, and coconuts and crops such as that could well form part of that. These kinds of options are often maybe not quite as effective as forests at contributing to hydrological services, but they're much easier to integrate into a productive landscape. They are often much more accessible, much more feasible for farmers than reforestation. And so they're likely to play an important role, and they're also likely to be much less costly. So you have a potentially a much more cost-effective solution by using such crops. And so again, when we examine such options, we should take a wide range of options into consideration and not narrow our focus excessively just to one or two possibilities. Thank you.
Okay. How about Dr. Lasco? Quick additional thought on.
Well, for coconut lands or and farmers, I think both adaptation and mitigation is relevant. They're the poorest of the poor, if I remember right, and therefore one of the most vulnerable as presented in the study. And therefore their resilience is very important. But on the other hand, the flip side, the mitigation, coconut are woody perennials and therefore can sequester carbon and therefore contribute to mitigation. So perhaps we can look at it, in a more integrated way so we can attract more funding for this sector.
There's specific strategies that can be implemented in that kind of farming system, but perhaps this one would need to be coupled with more financial and economic analysis. Better life way to go. Sir John, please. And then maybe later, if you have one youth, a young person to ask a question, that would be very much welcome also. I'm running out of time, but that will be very much welcome. Sir John, please.
Thank you so much, Dean Rico. I think I'll just focus on one aspect in the interest of time. And that is the highlight of the report in terms of differentiated impacts. And I think I like that very much because really climate change have impacts not only on various sectors, but also it impact differently across different socioeconomic situations. And therefore, we have in the process, actually, if you look at the opportunities, we have also winners and losers as in the impacts of climate change, or even with the opportunities that goes with it. So if we are to begin with the end in mind, mainly because we're saying that it really always impacts on the poor. And therefore, the long list of suggestions and recommendations that we're saying here should address the vulnerability of the poorer sector. And my fear is that if we are not so targeted and very conscious with our strategy, then in fact, there might be solutions that may in fact exacerbate the vulnerability of the poorer sector. So I go therefore in terms of how then do we prioritize our strategy so that the most vulnerable are really the one that will be in a way helped by the different strategies and policies that we are providing. And just last point, on the Mandanas opportunities, let me also reiterate that we've been talking on the ground to some LGUs, and some of them are saying, in fact, there are more responsibilities that is being downgraded to them compared to the resources. So let's probably also look at that along that line. Thank you so much.
Very good points raised, Sir John. Thank you. Maybe we need to address the first question to our two speakers. Maybe
I can try. I can try my version, the economist version, and the very first aspect I will highlight is we believe that one of the key poverty reducing policy is growth, because if the economy grows, it will provide job opportunities. People will have an income, and it solves the problem of poverty. And because we have been showing that if nothing is done, growth will be impacted somehow. GDP will be 14% less than what it should have been by 2040. So by making sure that we address these kind of macro level challenges so that growth happens and jobs are created, will also have an impact implicit on poverty and income of the poor. So this will be, as I said, the macro level aspect of my answers. But it's important also to target the poor, particularly that we have shown that maps show clearly that poor are concentrated in some places that are also more exposed to flooding, more exposed to drought. So having a targeted intervention on these places using social protection measures would be, I would say, the second thing to make sure that we have enough funding and the use of this funding are effective to target the people who need it the most. But maybe Stefano has a more environmental answer to that question.
Or more customized to the Philippine conditions, Stefano.
Let me just add a few points to the good points that Sue has already made. As we showed, the impact of climate change will be felt throughout the population. But clearly, because the poor are going to be hurt most, and because they have less means to cope out of their own resources, helping them will be particularly important. But as you emphasize, it's important to do that intelligently. It could easily be that some of the things we do have perverse impacts and actually exacerbate the vulnerability rather than improving them. It's also quite possible that certain groups would be negatively affected by things we need to do for adaptation or for mitigation measures, things that are bring broad benefits to society may nevertheless have a negative effect on individuals. And so some of that can be avoided by good design policies. We know quite a bit about the structure of poverty, the structure of vulnerability, and use that when we design policies. But sometimes you need to offset. And here, though, we have some very good examples, both positive and negative here in the Philippines. On the positive side, when Russia invaded Ukraine a year ago and energy prices spiked, a whole lot of countries started saying, oh, people are going to be affected by energy prices. Let's get rid of energy taxes. And a lot of people did exactly that. So somewhat reducing the impact of price rises population, but at the cost also of perpetuating the incentives to use fossil fuels and overuse fossil fuels. The Philippines was the only country that, to my knowledge, reacted differently and said, no, we're not going to change fuel taxes. We're going to use our adaptive social protection programs to provide relief, direct relief to those who are most affected. And I think that was a very intelligent way of doing things. Some groups are being hurt. Let's provide them help to help them recover from that hurt without creating perverse incentives at the same time. So I think that was a very good example of how we can use our adaptive social protection to solve a problem without causing another one. A bad example of the same thing is FISA, the act that ended payments for water for farmers, for most farmers. It came certainly from a very good intention of helping farmers who are often very poor by reducing their costs. So the intention, nobody can object to the intention, but it did that in a way that makes that removes all incentives to use water efficiently. And so that's a very perverse outcome. Not only perverse because and perverse in two ways. One is because it changes the incentives for the farmers and takes away most incentives to do things. And also perverse because then all those costs now have to be borne by the government to the tune of several billion pesos a year. And we were just talking about the need to target public resources. If we're using public resources for this purpose, we have so much less to use for better purposes. So again, if we had really wanted to provide additional economic relief to poor farmers, it would have made a lot more sense to use channel it through 4Ps or for a similar program, rather than creating a perverse incentive on such an important resource. So you're absolutely right. These are things that we need to think through very carefully. How we do these policies. I think we can know enough to design them in ways that we minimize the problem, the possibility of problems, but then we also need to monitor, make sure that monitor how things are going so that we can then do course correction.
I understand much of this is, the differences across different LGUs. But I think what is also important is the empowerment for the LGUs to they themselves be able to identify what works on the ground, how to pursue that, given these financial mechanisms that they can avail. We don't have much time though, but if there is one young, all of you are young, everybody of us here are young, but if one last question, very quick question. Okay, lady at the back, please. Yes, and then there are questions actually sent to us via Facebook, but we'll request our speakers to reply sometime later. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning.
Okay.
So good morning po. I'm Miriam Tagyab an undergraduate from BS Agricultural Biotechnology under CAPS and iCrafts. And I just want to say that I'm thankful to be included in this seminar because it really makes me feel that I am part of the conversation. And also to all the people watching this in Facebook and other platforms, I'm also guessing that they're feeling the same way and they're really glad to be included in the conversation. And so that made me realize that conversations like this really help understand and raise awareness. And also on the part of our speakers, they discuss accountability, like how can we raise that accountability? I think it is through this conversation and the series of seminars that SEARCA and ayan, that SEARCA will be doing in the future. I just have a question about having mentioned the private sector's investments and the electrification of our transport system, and also just the electrification of transportation, even cars. I have a question in the sense that in the next series, will there be specifically like the included guests, the invitation sent, will there be a series where business owners like the Roro Bus, Terry, and the RTV, which really should be included in the conversation so that they will feel the accountability to invest? Will there be a series that will like gather these business people and let them join in the conversation and share what have been shared today? Because really being just included here and having questions and this discussion really raises the accountability part.
Thank you. Thank you for raising that. And we really love empowered youth. And your question is a very good question. Let's ask Dr. Stefano. You're talking about decarbonization, particularly in transportation.
Yes, in the next series, yes, transportation.
Yeah, okay. Any thoughts, Dr. Stefano?
Well, again, this is an area where you need to make sure that the incentives are right. And that's partly a question of information. Right? You mentioned electrification. Right now, for example, electric vehicles are costlier to buy than internal combustion engine vehicles. So if you go to the car dealer and you just look at the sticker price, you can say, ooh, my God. Now, the difference is falling, but right now it's still the case that electric vehicles are much expensive. Now, once you have it, they tend to be much cheaper to operate than gasoline-powered vehicles, especially now that prices have increased quite substantially. So understanding, not going beyond, providing information that you need to consider not just that sticker price, but the whole flow of benefits and costs later is very important. It will allow people to make better decisions. Same thing for efficient buildings, same thing for a wide range of actions, particularly on electrification. So part of that is providing information that allows people to make the right decision. And then partly is, again, making sure that the incentive, sure that we don't have perverse taxes that make good things appear excessively expensive, or perverse subsidies that make bad things appear excessively cheap. And that will help a long way. But again, there is no silver bullet here. You need to act in a wide range of domains to solve the problems.
Thank you, Stefano.
I will just answer it quickly because her question is if we will have a series on that, because you requested it, we will consider that's part of the value chain of transport is very part. So I'm asking our department to consider that we will be having that part of the series. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Gregorio. I know this has been a very, very productive, very enlightening discussion. I hope, just like me, you all learn from our authors, Dr. Stefano and Dr. Coulibaly. Sir, thank you very much. And of course, let's give a round of applause also, please, to our panelists, Dr. Sanchez, Dr. Lasco, Dr. Raj Cruz. This has been a very good discussion, but we look forward to concrete actions. Again, a pleasant morning to each and everyone.
Thank you very much, Dean Rico Angkog. A round of applause for Dean Angkog as well. Thank you. And to our dear panelists, thank you. It was such a delightful, insightful discussion. And we hope that our audience found even more learnings from our experts. Please stay on your seats. Please enjoy the soft pillows. there. Yes, I know that some of you might still have some lingering questions, but in the interest of time, we will now formally close the session with a synthesis of what has transpired in the ADSS. I now call on SEARCA's Deputy Director for Programs, Dr. Noor Azura Binti Adam, for the synthesis and closing.
Thank you very much, Sir Joe. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of SEARCA, I would like to express our greatest gratitudes and to our esteemed guests from the World Bank for sharing an important presentation on the key findings and recommendations of the Philippines Country Climate and Development Report, specifically on the agricultural impacts of climate change. We also would like to thank our guests from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, who participated in very insightful panel discussion. And SEARCA is truly grateful to proactively contribute to enabling a vibrant scientific exchange through an engaging dialogue. So allow me to deliver the synthesis of this program. So during the presentation of Dr. Pagiola and Dr. Coulibaly, it's on the Philippines CCDR. They examine in depth the sectors on water, agriculture, energy, transport, and urban areas, and how the impacts in these sectors will affect other sectors. It also identified the economy-wide impacts of climate change, as well as the opportunities for climate action. It also highlighted the importance of climate-smart agriculture practices in generating triple wins: high productivity and higher resilience, and also low emissions. It also underlined the roles of the public and private sectors in financing climate actions, and also emphasized on prioritizing adaptation and investing in mitigation to reduce impacts of climate change, particularly on the poor and vulnerable. It also recommended responses to climate change in the Philippines, such as making sure incentives are right, improving the effectiveness of government actions, and helping people cope with the effects of climate change and climate action. And we move further after that to the panel discussion. One thing that I would like to say before giving the synthesis on the discussion, when we talk about climate change, we must make sure that we do not, climate change is something for us not to believe or not. No, it's happening. You can't say that, you cannot choose whether it is, I believe in climate change or I don't believe in climate change. It is happening. So we have to engage on that one and try to find the, as we've all said just now, the mitigation, also adaptation. Both is very important to deal with the climate change. So in the panel discussion, we provided insights on engaging local communities and stakeholders to participate in climate action through participatory governance and building the capacity of local government units and local communities on climate change knowledge. But make sure that we do not fall into the category of one size fits all. We also have to jumpstart climate action by improving access to funding, encouraging investments on renewable energy, and making sure that renewable energy will be affordable, and connecting local and also the national plans. And consideration for implementation that include increasing the sense of accountability across various levels of governance, incentivizing the private sector in addressing priorities for climate change and exploring various levels of financing. And moving forward, multi-sectoral partnerships are needed to scale up on climate actions in the Philippines while delivering on broader development goals. So in that, SEARCA remains steadfast in fostering such collaboration opportunities to address the agricultural impacts of climate change in the Philippines and the Southeast Asian. I guess in this very short program, I don't think that we can cover all. We might not give justice, but please, everyone, with all that we have the QR codes where you can have the full results or reports of the programs. I would like to say that this is a very, very exciting and something that we put it into mind that climate change, we have to deal with it. And at the same time, we also have the youth here, because climate change, we might, as me, maybe I'm not that young anymore, but we have to think about the future. You know, if you cannot mitigate, we have to adapt. What we want to adapt to make sure that the adaptation that we would like to impose in our environment, in our situation right now, is something that is sustainable. And that is where SEARCA is also really putting efforts looking at the sustainable development of the future. And once again, thank you very much to our guests from the World Bank and everyone to be here in SEARCA Agriculture and Development Seminar Series. We hope to see you again in our future events. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Noor Azura. Kindly stay on stage, Madam. May I ask for the patience of our colleagues here? Our crew will slightly adjust the chairs so that we can proceed to the photo session, please. Please stay on stage. Makandang. And after the stage is on set, I will be inviting Dr. Diop and Dr. Gregorio on stage as well. But let's just arrange it. Yes. Okay. Adjust the Dr. Noor. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, refreshments are served outside, and thank you, World Bank Philippines, for providing free copies of the report outside. Okay, but please stay if you want to get a preview of the photo. Okay, Dr. Gregorio and Dr. Adam, can you join me here on this side? Madam Macandog, can you join us here as well? Thank you. And may I have the panelists? Dr. Gregorio and Dr. Adam and Dr. Diop will be handing the token. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Once again, refreshments and free copies of the report are available outside. Thank you very much.